After World War II, America didn't just rebuild, it completely rearranged itself. Three massive population shifts unfolded all across the country. And in the process, they didn't just change where people lived, they fundamentally redrew the entire American political map. Okay, let's dive into this. So, have you ever stepped and thought about this? Why does your specific neighborhood, your zip code, seem to be such a strong predictor of your political outlook? Well, the answer isn't just about the here and now. It's actually rooted in a series of dramatic movements that started over 75 years ago.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. We're going to break down these three huge migrations. First, we'll look at the explosive growth of suburbia. Then, we'll follow the massive shift of people from the Rust Belt down to the Sun Belt. After that, we'll explore the impact of new immigration. And finally, we'll tie it all together to see how it created the political landscape we're all living in today.
Our first story kicks off right after the war, with this big American dream of a house, a yard, and a whole new life outside the crowded city. And I mean, this was one of the largest internal migrations in the nation's entire history. We're talking millions of Americans, mostly white families, packing up and heading out of the dense city centers and into these brand new suburban communities. But here's the thing, this dream wasn't open to everybody, and that fact had some really profound consequences. To really get why this happened, you have to understand a crucial term, redlining. This was a widespread discriminatory practice where banks would literally draw a red line on a map around minority neighborhoods. They'd call these areas too hazardous for investment. So what did that mean? Well, it meant denying loans to the people who lived there, which effectively locked Black and other minority families completely out of the suburban boom. It concentrated poverty in the cities and created this massive barrier to building generational wealth. And the fallout from this kind of segregation, well, it was immediate and it was massive. This whole process fueled what we now call white flight, which left cities with a shrinking tax base and fewer resources. It also dug this deep political trench between increasingly diverse, often underfunded cities and the whiter, more affluent suburbs. All these simmering tensions, just driven by inequality and segregation, eventually just boiled over, contributing to a wave of urban riots across the country in the 1960s. So at the exact same time people were moving out of the cities, another great migration was taking place, but this time it was between entire regions of the country. It's really a tale of two Americas right here. Up north, you had the traditional industrial heartland, the Rust Belt, and it was facing serious economic decline and losing people left and right. But at the same time, the South and the West, what we call the Sun Belt, were absolutely booming. They were drawing people in with jobs and new defense plants and these emerging high-tech industries, especially in states like California. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about people chasing jobs. As millions and millions of Americans moved, they took their political influence right along with them. The country's center of gravity, both economically and politically, began to tilt and tilt dramatically, southward and westward. And this chart, it shows you exactly what that power shift looked like. See, every 10 years, congressional seats get reapportioned based on population. And what happened was Sunbelt states just kept gaining seats, which means more power in Washington, while the Rust Belt states watched their influence slowly decline. All right, so that brings us to the final huge piece of this puzzle. This one wasn't about people moving around inside the U.S., but about people arriving from all over the world, and in the process, fundamentally changing the country's demographic makeup. The real game changer here was the Immigration Act of 1965. This was a landmark piece of legislation that completely tore down the old quota system, which had heavily favored immigrants from Europe. In its place, the doors were thrown open to millions of people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, which really set the stage for a profoundly different America. And the impact? It was instantaneous and honestly pretty dramatic. After this act was passed, Hispanics became the fastest-growing minority group in the United States. This created a powerful new voting bloc, especially in those Sunbelt states, and it forced both political parties to completely rethink their platforms and how they reached out to voters for decades to come. And this change wasn't just something you'd see on a census report. You could feel it throughout the culture. We saw the rise of Spanish-language media, we saw new public debates over funding for bilingual education programs, and, most importantly, we saw the foundation being laid for the far more diverse nation we know today. Okay, so how do these three massive movements to the suburbs, to the Sun Belt, and to the U.S. from all over the world, how did they all connect to create the political map we see today? Well, it really comes together like this. First, suburbanization hardened that political divide between cities and their surrounding areas. Second, the rise of the Sun Belt pulled the nation's political focus away from the old industrial North. And third, new immigration patterns created entirely new voting blocs that changed the electorate for good. So, when you boil it all down, these migrations were definitely not just some dusty old footnotes in a history book. As the source material puts it, they directly impacted voting practices and the fundamental balance of power between America's political parties. And those are effects that we are still living with in every single election cycle. From white flight to the rise of the Sun Belt, these huge population shifts really tell the story of modern America's political identity. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. If these were the movements that defined the last half century, what are the migrations happening right now that are going to define our political world for the next?